To talk more about this, we have Shukri Ahmed, an economist at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, and Ayo Johnson, editor of Viewpoint Africa in London. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. We all remember 1992, the humanitarian crisis in Somalia. But this time, once again, how bad is it though? Mr. Kilami, Mr. Ahmed.
Yes, as you have rightly indicated, this is a situation which has been developing for more than 2 decades. In 1991, we have seen a similar situation. However, 2 decades on, we have disinvestment in the agricultural sector. People have lost what they had. So this is a worse situation, and the number of people that have been affected now, as you already have seen in your clips, it really is dire situation.
If humanitarian aid arrived in Somalia earlier, is a humanitarian crisis could have been prevented? Once again, Mr. Ahmed.
This is the whole crux of the matter, is that one aspect of it is the humanitarian assistance not getting in, but also it is the ability of the population itself. You know, these population have livestock, they are agro-pastoralists, they are crop producers. It is their inability for the last 20 years which is the main culprit of the whole thing. Yes, when they also are affected, we need humanitarian assistance to be in time, but because of the conflict, it was difficult for people to get through, and the humanitarian agencies that were in the country were unable to get their the humanitarian assistance that is needed in time, at the right time, and at the right place. And that is true.
Mr. Johnson, do you agree with Mr. Ahmed that the humanitarian assistance did not arrive in Somalia because only the human-inflicted crisis in that country, or rather the international community has been unable to act until now?
Yes, Somalia is a real crisis and very sad. A conflict that's gone on for way too long. We had back in the 1970s Said Barre, who was the president. He came into power. He had a socialist movement that failed. Again, the socialists, many militants decided to take control of that country. Again, they couldn't find any peace. The Djibouti process in 2000 again did not resolve it. And of course, what we have now is chaos. We've got people on the ground who are being affected. But again, in saying that, we also have extreme conditions which have led to failing farming techniques, failing agriculture, and of course, the yield of the harvest has been very bad. So I think people are suffering as a result of that. So you have people who are living on the edge already, who are living on less than $1 a day, and then when you push them further, especially with famine, then we have crisis where naturally the calorie intake within the body breaks down, and of course people cannot be susceptible to these sort of conditions. And what we're finding is it becomes that much more acute when we have Al-Shabaab, who clearly controls large swathes of that country and cannot allow aid workers to do their job. So people have got to walk very long distances, usually 3 weeks, just to get to safety in neighboring countries.
That's right. But while the situation on the ground is as such, what can be done now? Because the people are experiencing the starvation, they're experiencing this huge humanitarian crisis. Can the Western donors, can the African countries shoulder what kind of responsibilities now? Mr. Johnson again.
Well, the responsibilities are twofold. Firstly, they've got to start negotiating with Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab controls large swathes of that country, but that negotiation is not going to happen when Britain, France, and America have made it very clear that they would not negotiate with them, simply because they've been seen as a draconian organization, an organization that's been branded by the United States as terrorists. They've got affiliation with very dangerous groups around the world, especially, and of course, it's even worse when it would be now that the type of aid that's going in needs to be that much sharper, needs to be that much more focused and far more pronounced. So what you do find moving forward is that aid agencies have to work that much more harder. But the pledges that are being made around the world need to be translated into receipts on the ground, and that's where fundamentally the problem is. The money is not coming in as one would expect, and aid agencies, for all intensive purposes, their imagery media campaign, which has been blighted by death, disease, and destruction, in terms of the imagery that's used in the Western media to attract funding, has been very confusing for those individuals who have to make those pledges. Simply because if in better times you use the same imagery of kids who've got extended bellies, whose faces are sunken and very thin, and then you use the same imagery with a crisis of this magnitude, then people get confused. They can't really identify with the imagery and relate to the effect on the ground. So I think aid agencies have got to do that much more, but more so I think governments have to do that much more.
Okay, Mr. Ahmed, do you agree with our African friend, Mr. Johnson, that aid agencies for quite some time has been misusing some of the images, and now when at a time of crisis, those images would not work anymore in waking up people's sympathy?
Well, I think it works. I mean, the whole conscience of the world now has moved. The main issue is, why did we get here in the first place? Yes, that's a very good question that one has to ask, you know, any time from the very beginning, now, and even in the future. But I think at this time, it is saving lives that is much more important. Whatever it is, we have to do what we can to save those children, to save those people, those weak people that we have seen on television.
Right, and now you
With that, we have to save livelihoods.
Right, now you do have a danger for the humanitarian staff to arrive on the ground to deliver the aid. What can you do?
Well, I think it is some already humanitarian agencies are inside. We have to use them as much as possible. We have to make our way in, whether it is by dropping from the air, whatever we can, we need to do something now to save lives. And I think the most important thing now is for people to be given what is needed where they are. The movement of people is creating a whole lot of misery for people that are already have suffered a lot. You know, into Somalia, into Kenya, you know, traveling days and days with that weakness is really unacceptable. So whatever it is, we have to get it to get the food where it is needed, to keep at least the people in where they are.
But as we mentioned earlier, there are dangers on the ground for aid agencies to operate, and therefore, do you call for political support, military support in that regard on the ground, Mr. Ahmed?
Well, there are already some moves to open what we call humanitarian corridors, and it is working in that. I think that has to be kept up. The humanitarian corridor has to be kept up, and with it also, we have to have at least food, whether it is airdrops, we have to have it until these negotiations actually bear fruit. Whatever negotiations there are, whatever force that we use, getting the food to the people now is as essential as anything. So it's not only one way or the other. We have to use a combination of things for the food to get to the people that need it.
Right. One of the combination of things, one of the elements in the combination of things back in the year 1992 is the United States sending troops into Somalia. Of course, later, 18 U.S. soldiers died. The U.S. withdrew. As a result of that, the country went back into chaos. Some say we're even opening more space for the terrorists. Mr. Johnson, do you think there's any way of a short-term political solution to this crisis, to be on time to save the lives in Somalia?
Well, I think that's dependent on the United States and Britain. They are in the countries that have great influence. And for now, they've chosen to support the weak government in Somalia, especially that of President Ahmed. Now, he controls only the capital, and he doesn't have headway elsewhere in the country. The Al-Shabaab movement, be it that they follow Sharia law, which is not necessarily approved and respected around the world by a lot of governments, they have got to find a way to negotiate with the rest of the world, but it's not happening. Clearly, the people in Somalia are the ones that are most affected. We had great numbers of people who've been displaced, not to mention the countless, many thousands that are refugees in neighboring countries. So I think in terms of resolving this moving forward is how all the various groups in Somalia can be harmonized. How is it that a functioning government can be allowed to govern, and very much how it is that the international community can support Somalia through three ways, which is first, emergency relief help, which is what's happening now currently, but how you can back that up with smarter aid that focuses specifically in governance areas, or to strengthen those governance weakened areas. And of course, thirdly, one-off booster financial injections can be offered to the Somali government to support itself. But for you to get to that position, you need the government to be able to negotiate with Al-Shabaab. You need Al-Shabaab to be prepared to speak to the international community. You need the international community to be able to take back its position and to be able to speak with Al-Shabaab. So I think no one's prepared to do so at the moment. And that's the difficulty. How do you get everyone on the table? And I don't believe Al-Shabaab is prepared to do so.
Another arms embargo has been renewed in Somalia, but whether that would solve the problem or not is still debatable. But Mr. Ahmed, from your perspective now, many Somalis have been fleeing the country into neighboring regions, for example, into Ethiopia, into Kenya. How do you think widespread this crisis is likely to be? What does it mean when these refugees go into other countries for those Eastern African neighbors?
Yes, I think the worst about this is the neighboring countries that they are going to, especially the neighboring immediate areas, are also affected. This is a kind of an agroclimatic area that share the same kind of livelihood, the same kind of rainfall, and they have also suffered the same kind of drought, almost unprecedented for the last 60 years, as we have seen from the analysis. So the areas that they are going to as well, people who are living there already have been affected. So it is countries which are already, feeling the heat from the problems that they are facing themselves, are now again tending for the people that are, the refugees that are coming into the areas. So apart from the food, I think, and the refugees are also another area that we really need a big investment into, helping also the hosting countries for them to have water and other. Saving lives is one thing within the country wherever we can, but I think at the same time we have to think of the rehabilitation of the agricultural sector. These people are agro-pastoralists. Wherever there are crops, we need to invest in the irrigation system. These areas that have been affected now had one of the best irrigation systems. They used to export bananas and everything to Europe, to other parts of the world. We somehow have to. Yes, the conflict is the biggest problem. Unless we solve that, there would be a problem to invest. However, whatever we can, we need to have both the humanitarian immediate food, but at least also we need to rehabilitate the livelihoods as well.
How much possibility is there to reinstore the rehabilitation of the common people in Somalia? Has the conflict inside Somalia been used as an excuse for other countries for not acting to help, Mr. Johnson?
Well, yes. The problem with the Somali conflict is that its neighboring countries, especially Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, are not in good terms with the Somali people as it is, because we've had conflicts. We've had the Al-Shabaab movement, which has extended its tentacles, inflicting one-to-one combat, cross-border combat in Uganda and Kenya, and of course even more recently in Kenya currently, there are talks of the fact that Al-Shabaab is now recruiting individuals in Kenya, young boys, people who are going to the madrasas and to join its campaign. So I think the problem is, how do you get these countries who are already fragile states? I classify them as fragile states because the conditionality that led to their fragility becomes that much more apparent, especially so when they're compounded by the fact that major movements or large swathes of people are moving into their countries for support and assistance, for which they are already struggling to assist their own people. So it's compounded and makes that much more difficult. I think that's where the African Union currently this week is thinking of how they can have a meeting to have some countries make pledges. But again, coming back to the pledges issue, it's one thing to make a pledge, it's another another thing to convert that pledge to receipts on the ground, and anyone can make a pledge. So it's difficult all around, and I think the African Union and the European Union and the United Nations have to sit down and find a formula to help Somalia as a whole, because in the future, Somalia definitely cannot move forward in this situation because people are suffering and the government's not working, and its neighboring countries are not prepared to interact with the rebels.
All right. The crisis is going on the ground. Real actions need to be taken. Ayo Johnson, Shukri Ahmed, thank you very much, gentlemen. We will be back with these stories.
Still to come, a military debut. China adds an aircraft carrier to its naval fleet, the first ever for the country. Against the clock, U.S. politicians are under pressure to come up with a deal to resolve its debt problems as the deadline approaches. And money matters. We sit down with the IMF's official in China to talk about the country's growing influence at the organization.
New shipping hub in Northeast Asia. Reaching the world from Northeast China, port of Dandong.
Talking tough on trade, conflicts over currency, and connecting economies around the world. From Tokyo to Shanghai and Mumbai, Biz Asia links you live to the markets and brings you all the latest in business from China's unique perspective. Biz Asia, a smart investment for your time.
You're watching World Inside on CCTV News. The aircraft carrier is the most powerful ship on the earth and also on the sea. Last Wednesday, China's Defense Ministry officially confirmed for the first time that it's pursuing an aircraft carrier program. The former Soviet-era vessel, the Vayag, is now stationed in the northeastern port of Dalian and is expected to begin testing at sea soon. The ministry spokesman said China's new aircraft carrier program would not change China's Navy's strategy of inshore defense.
A long-held secret officially unveiled. China will have its first aircraft carrier.
Taking into account all elements, authorities in China are seriously looking into the development of an aircraft carrier. Currently, we are refurbishing an old aircraft carrier for research and training purposes.
The Voyag aircraft carrier was constructed in Ukraine in the 1980s, but it was never completed due to the collapse of the Soviet Union. In 1998, a company in Macau purchased the vessel, which was then sent to China. Crews began rebuilding it in 2005, and now after 6 years, the construction work is nearly finished. Experts believe the new carrier will enhance the country's naval capabilities.
China is a country with a long coastline and territorial water. With its economic development, China needs to protect its interests overseas. This requires increasing its naval capability in the deep sea.
The launch of China's first aircraft carrier has aroused a lot of media interest. The British news agency Reuters says, quote, such a launch could be a first exploratory step towards an operational carrier fleet. It will probably take the Chinese Navy years to possess a credible carrier operation in Asia's seas. The U.S.-based Associated Press says the latest move has come to symbolize China's ambitions for a military with global reach. Though the addition of one carrier to China's rapidly expanding navy isn't expected to threaten the U.S. military's dominance. Today, 9 countries operate active service aircraft carriers, but the U.S. has the largest fleet and the biggest carriers.
Without including smaller aviation-related ships such as helicopter carriers, there's a total of 21 strict-sense aircraft carriers in the world. The U.S. has 11 of them, which accounts for half of the world's number. All of their carriers are large in scale.
In recent years, the aircraft carrier has become the ultimate symbol of an advanced, powerful modern military. That was proven during Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in the early 1990s. Within 1 hour of the invasion, 2 aircraft carrier fleets from the U.S. headed to the Gulf region, providing an important base for armies from 34 countries. After 42 days of airstrikes and 100 hours of land battles, Iraq finally retreated from Kuwait. During recent conflict in Libya, France's Charles de Gaulle carrier assisted forces with patrolling regional waters and conducting airstrikes.